church when it was 1989. 1989, my family and I were pioneering in London at the time. We were there from 1987 to 1994. Peter came in 1989 with another young man, his friend Joe Agunia, who's also currently pastoring in Birmingham, England. So when I left England to come here to El Paso in 1994, Peter was still in the church. And what year was you got sent out? 99, so he was there for quite a while after that, helping transition and so forth, and continuing with his discipleship. So what I would like you to do to start with is take 5 minutes and encapsulate your life story. To share your testimony about upbringing. I know he lived here, and I think you lived in Dallas, but you were never a Dallas Cowboy fan, right?
No, I
wasn't. Childhood and early formative years, he lived in Dallas with his mother. I met his mother. She's a Christian and had attended our church on and off. She didn't live in London, but he's got a great godly mother, and she lives currently, I think, in New Jersey. So she's here stateside. So just come, share a little bit about your testimony, how it came about that you got saved and gave your life to Christ and came into the fellowship, the church, and then I'll ask you some questions.
Right, okay. Well, morning, gentlemen. I got a lot to say. I'm going to say a number of things during the revival. You hear a lot more of my testimony. But I did get saved the 15th of April 1988. It was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'll never forget it. Like a 2-ton weight lifted off my shoulder. I knew I was free. I was delivered. And shortly after, I left Nigeria. Because if you know my background, I was born in England. And that was 1967. Moved to the States, and then we moved back to Africa. So when I got saved and moved to England, I was praying for a church. I said, God, I'm going to go to church. And so I found this leaflet, and that led from one thing to another. Then finally, I came to an indoor crusade by Pastor Mitchell. He was preaching. At the time, we were called Victory Chapel. This is before our name was changed to Potter's House. And so I said, hey, when I heard Pastor Mitchell and I saw the scene, I said, this is where I need to be. And so I planted my life there under the ministry of Pastor Stevens and allowed that discipleship to take place. Of course, a lot of rough edges for me developing. But it was not till 1999 that I actually entered into the ministry. And so I've been a minister now for the last 20 years. And just this last year, started evangelizing. And it's a great joy to be a part of what God's doing. And I wouldn't exchange it for anything else in the world.
Yes.
But that's it in a nutshell.
All right. So you mentioned rough edges in discipleship. So tell us about, in the office I mentioned, I was going to ask you maybe some of the mistakes you think you made as a disciple. How many were in the church when you started coming? It was a small amount.
Yeah, about 15.
15 or 20, so we were just pioneering. So, I mean, Peter's life shows you the quality of man that you can get in your church when you're pioneering. You know, they're not all psychos in the beginning. So when Peter, it was like I said, it was a friend of his, Joe Agunia, who's equally as quality a man as Peter is. I don't know if Peter would say that, but he really is from our perspective. And he's a good brother and a good pastor. So, so you came in, started getting discipled, and so what were your first impressions of the church, the ministry, the fellowship, and so forth, as you started coming beyond the crusade and started getting involved?
Well, yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I never really had any reference points. After I got saved, my first encounter was with the Jehovah's Witnesses, and right from the time they came to my home, I knew something wasn't right. You know when you just know something's not right? This is not what I got. When I got saved, this is what they're talking about here. When I came into the Potter's House, or prior to coming in, I started visiting different churches. I went to the Church of England, Catholic Church. I'd see people light up after the service. I said, this can't be Christianity. This can't be what I got on the 15th of April. It was not till I came into the Potter's House. Again, when I say I had no references, I mean to real structured Christianity, biblical Christianity. I didn't have any real references to that. But I have to say I was blown away. It was a small congregation of people. Pastor was saying 15 to 20 people. We had an indoor crusade. We didn't tables and chairs. We're sitting behind little desks, and Pastor Mitchell was preaching, but it was the atmosphere. It was electrified. You knew that the presence of God was there. And even though it was a small work, I knew that's where I needed to be. I wasn't looking for the megachurch experience. I just wanted to be where Jesus was. And so there were just a handful of men at the time. A guy by the name of James Mensa. There was Trevor Bradshaw. Trevor Bradshaw was like, he was like our main, the epitome of a disciple. You talk about, I thought this man is cream of the crop. You know, pastors talking about great quality of men. This man was the man we all looked up to as younger disciples. And so there were some good quality men. Matter of fact, what's interesting is that the men that were there at the very start are still running today in ministry. They're strong, they're solid. Apart from two, everyone else is in their place, even from those formative years of discipleship. And so what impressed me more was the method in which Pastor Stevens discipled. He taught us to be strong, to weather the storm, you know, to take a licking and keep on ticking. You know, and so I really do look back over the years of my salvation. I've been a Christian 30 years now. And I could say that it was those early years, those formative years as a young disciple, that's put what I have in me today. And had it not been for that experience, that early experience in Victory Chapel, I don't think I'd be the man that I am today. And I think that we got purpose under his ministry, under Pastor Stevens. There's a lot of purpose, direction, a lot of wisdom, incredible amounts of wisdom. And we were in vision. And under his ministry, we felt we could take the world. I mean, we had gigantic faith. I mean, he's preaching to a crowd of 15, 20 people like he's preaching to 500. You can imagine. I mean, you know, we talk about crowd dynamics, but we didn't really have much crowd dynamics. But I think there must have been angels in the room or something. But it was such a fascinating time for me. I never even dreamed of ever leaving church, or I was never discouraged. When I saw the hell that Pastor Stevens had to go through, I said, man, this thing is worth fighting for. And I'm not going to back out of it. And so it really was a blessing for me to be in the church in those early years, to help me to become the man that I am today. And it's helped to sustain me in ministry and in my family, my marriage, and right through my life. And so it really has been a joy.
Okay, so then let's get to the rough edges. Some of the dynamics in the first few months and years of your discipleship, some of the rough edges that needed to be removed, if you could be a little self-effacing, and maybe in the context of some mistakes that you made along the way and things that God needed to help you with.
Yeah, I had a lot of issues as a young man, and you'll hear some of that stuff this morning, some of the root of that, and later on this week. But I've always been a slow learner. I'm not one who picks things up really quickly. And you know when you have a problem and you don't know that you have a problem, that's the worst kind of problem you could ever have. I have a problem and not know it. And I had all these problems, and it took me forever to connect the dots. Pastor Stevens would say stuff, and I just wouldn't get it. You know, I remember one day, Pastor Stevens came to me and said, Peter, you're full of pride. I never knew I had pride till he said it. And when he said that, it's like these shock waves went through me. I'll never forget that day. I started praying daily, God, forgive me of pride. Get pride out of my heart. You know, I want to live a humble life. I want to be clothed with humility. And I remember sometime later, I'm not sure when, Pastor Stevens said, yeah, he felt that there was some kind of change. I'm not sure how much, but that was one of the things. Is I had a lot of pride that I was unaware of, and I guess that had to do with a lot of my background and my upbringing. I remember one time, I'd say probably the biggest mistake in my discipleship years is one particular time when I didn't listen to my pastor. You know when you get to that place in discipleship where you think you know better than your pastor? Anybody ever been there? Don't lift your hand. Nah. Everything was working for me this period of my life. I had the Midas touch. Everything I touched turned to gold. I applied for jobs, I get the job. You know, I passed my driving test first time. You know what the driving test challenge is like in the United Kingdom. I mean, everyone wanted to employ me. Money was rolling in, opportunity. And so there was this girl that I was dating in Africa before I left. told Pastor Stevens, I said, you know, I'm going to travel back home, I'm going to bring this girl back, and I'm going to marry her. And without even going into all the details of it, Pastor Stevens just looked at me and said, Peter, it's not wise. And I didn't understand everything he was saying, but I thought, man, you know what? Pastor Stevens got it wrong this time. I said, this is right. Listen, I got the Midas touch. Everything's working for me. I'm going to go back, get this girl, the girl of my dreams. I'm going to bring her back. I'm going to marry her. He said, Peter, that's not wise. And that's all he said. I boarded an airplane against his counsel, and I traveled to Nigeria, and nothing worked out. I got so sick, I nearly died. I had to go to New York. My mother was living in New York at the time, and she had to nurse me back to health. I was gone for 4 months. People in church were saying, Peter's never coming back. I remember Joe, the pastor made reference to Joe Gwynn. He said, oh no, I know Peter will come back. There's no way Peter's going to leave. And so, you know, he started calling me, Peter, hey, what's up? Are you coming? I said, yeah, I'm coming back. It's just that, you know, I'm not well. When I get better, I'll come back. I had lost 2 stone in weight. And I remember when I returned.
That's 28 pounds.
28 pounds, yeah, 14 pounds of stone. I lost 28 pounds. And so I get back to England. I was the head usher, Joan. It was me. I ushered people in. And so we had the head usher seat. And so I went and sat in the head usher seat. And the new head usher ushered me to a seat. And then that morning, Pastor Stevens had to get up and preach a sermon called The Comeback Kid. I'll never forget it. I'm about the prodigal son. I'm like, oh my God. And again, I hadn't connected some dots. It was coming back after all of that, losing my apartment. I lost my job, had nowhere to live. I was sleeping on the floor. Neil, there's a guy called Neil Webb, sleeping on the floor of one of the rooms in his apartment. You know, and I basically had nothing. I had no ministry. I'd lost everything. And I had to start rock bottom. I had to go right back to the very beginning and start all over again. And I would say that was probably the most devastating mistake I made. 4 months of my discipleship just vanished, just like that, because I wouldn't listen. I was hard-headed, pig-headed, stubborn, full of pride, and I just wouldn't get it. And it was not till Pastor said, you know what, you're full of pride. It hit me like a torpedo. Like, God, man, that's my problem. This is I just can't listen. And when you fail to listen, you fail to learn. You fail to learn, you fail to advance in life. And so I'd say that's probably one of the many mistakes.
All right. At what stage, after you got saved or came into the fellowship, because you were already saved, did you feel like you were called to preach?
Yeah. Straight away, as I came in, I instantly felt it. There was a spirit that was being generated in the midst. The atmosphere was just, you couldn't but want to preach. You know, it was Julius Caesar that said, there's a tide in the affairs of man. If taken at the flood, leads on to great fortune. And it was like we always had that tide. It's like, we need to jump in this. We got to get in now. And I think that's what it was, is when I came in, it's straight away I felt it. This is what we want to do. So that's all we ever talked about. Like all the disciples, every single disciple in the church, always talked about preaching. From myself, to Simeon, to Joe, to Leighton. I don't know, some of you might know Leighton Ainsworth. But all those guys in the early days, all we ever dreamed about, all we ever talked about, Jay Nemart, all we ever talked about was preaching the gospel. So it was from the moment I came in, I knew this is what I need to do in my life. I saw Pastor Stevens, the fervor, the zest, the zeal, the anointing, the drive, and I said, this is what, he's following Jesus. And what Jesus did is what we want to do. So we became we were rough disciples. But nevertheless, we wanted what our pastor wanted. We wanted what our pastor was doing. We wanted to build churches. We wanted to take the world. I had visions of going to India at one time. I remember telling the guys, I'm going to go to India one day. I mean, all we did was dream about taking the world. And so I would say straight away, straight after I came in, I knew what I wanted to do.
And then, so you got sent out in 1999. Talk about that. This is your first pioneer effort. Tell us where you went, how long you were there, what God did, what you did next, etc.
let me begin by saying that you have to take advantage of the opportunity of a lifetime in the lifetime of the opportunity. What that means is that an opportunity has a lifespan.
Yeah.
An opportunity has a beginning and it has an end. Doors open and doors close. When that door came, I remember the time as Pastor Carnegie had asked me to pray about 3 cities. He asked me to pray about a place called Croydon, and then up north England, a place called Leeds, and then of course there was Bristol, which is on the southwest coast of England. And so my wife and I were praying about this and really felt impressed that Bristol was the place. It's like you get all these little signs all through that conference. You're getting all these signs that pointed to Bristol, and I really felt Bristol was the place. And so we answered the call, and so it was the conference of November 1998, and then we went out in February 99, and started the church. I had a few challenges at the beginning because I went to spy out the land at the start. When I went out, everyone was telling me, oh yeah, there are lots of musicians in Bristol, and when the slave trade was abolished, the slaves settled in Bristol, all these black people are going to be coming in, you're going to get musicians, and you're going to have a powerful work. I'm like, wow. So I went into Bristol looking for all the black people. And I didn't see one single black person that day. I went in with my cousin, Pastor Carnegie. We drove around, we didn't see one black person the whole day. And I thought, man, I was so discouraged. I thought, man, how am I going to build a church? Man, these white English, they don't believe in God. They're heathens. God convicted me. God convicted us. I don't say by culture. I don't say by nationality or ethnicity. The gospel saves all people. Amen. And I went back with a renewed vision, and we settled in Bristol City. I think our opening service, I remember our opening concert, 40 people prayed. Our opening service on Sunday, we had 24 people in service. I remember my worst Sunday service was 8 people. Worst Wednesday service was 3. And we just started working with a lot of crazy folks came in the early days. We started working with, I had all these mad people, mad guys. I had one guy who constantly saw things running up the walls. Another guy, who would go into Portland Square and sleep with prostitutes. I had one guy, he had no underwear on. He would come to church with no underwear. Just crazy, crazy. And God said to me, if you can pastor and love crazy people, you can build a church. And so we started working in those early days, and we got our building, began to minister. The church began to grow, and in 4 years, 3 years and 11 months exactly, we were running over 120 people. And we had marriages. I had married all these couples. We were right on the verge of getting ready to start planting churches. We had our own building. You'll hear part of that testimony this week. It was just a thriving work. We had a few setbacks. I remember one time we had a rebellion that broke out in the church. I was here actually preaching. At the time we were running 80 people. I remember Pastor Stevens announcing me to come up. I was preaching like a Sunday morning or a Sunday night. And he had Peter, he's going back to Bristol. He's got a baptism. He's going to be baptizing 36 people when he gets back, etc. I don't know if some of you were here, if you remember that. Pastor, do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I got back, 40 people had left church. Because one lady, Jackie Davis, I'll never forget her, God bless her heart. Jackie Davis told the song leader and tons of people in church that we're a cult and I'm a cult leader. And they all left. I got back to a church of like 40 people, 39, 38 people. It was the darkest day in the ministry for me there. I remember one morning coming to morning prayer. I was the only one in the building. There were no lights on. I could hear demons laughing behind me. It was a terrifying experience. And it's almost like the devil was trying to crush everything God was doing in Bristol. But we broke through it. God was gracious and merciful. And the church recovered itself. Like I said, went on to over 120 people. And then we left for Africa at the time. We went as missionaries for a short while into the nation of Namibia. And so, I don't know if you want me to tell a little bit about that or any more specifics about that.
You took over Namibia. Yeah, give it a couple minutes on that.
Yeah, okay. So Pastor Carnegie called me and asked, hey, there's an opening in Namibia. Would you like to go? And of course, this was difficult. We have a church now. We got over 120 people, rebuilding, disciples, married couples. We're ready to preach the gospel. I took a few of our guys down to Cardiff in Wales, You probably read the Welsh revival. So we went down to Wales, and I'm trying to show these guys how you can start, how you can build a church, how you can have an outreach. And so I just preached on the street, the crowd gathered around, I gave an altar call, and something like 30, 40 people prayed right on the street. And so these men, they were so fascinated by that, they believed that they could do the same thing too. So we were right ready to start planting churches. These guys were heated. And that's when I got the phone call to go to Namibia. So
tell them where Namibia is, they may not know.
Namibia is South Africa. So you've got South Africa at the bottom of Africa. Namibia is north of that. So it's sitting right on top of the border. So you got South Africa right here and Namibia right on top. Right? So you know your geography. And so we went in there, and Steve Anderson was the pioneer of that church. And he did a great job. He built a church with about 70 people. Some good disciples, a strong core. And so we came in and we took over. We started outreaching as we normally would. They would go into the malls and outreach. I said, no, we're going to go downtown. We're going to do some street preaching. And we turned that city upside down to the point that the president of the country at the time, Sam Ujoma, started putting articles in the newspaper about our church. Indirectly, not mentioning the Potter's House, but saying these churches that are coming into town, they're doing this. He started addressing that they're fake, they're false, don't listen to them. People started, by the wagon load, started pouring into the church. And in 4 months, we were running over 250 people. My first baptism, we baptized 67 people in an outdoor pool. It took me 2 hours to do it. What the devil meant for bad, God turned it around.
Yes,
and so it was like a forest fire. Something was unleashed in these people's hearts, and it became a thriving work. Over 250. Then we lost our permit to stay there. They put us out of the country. Though I actually got it 2 months later, I had to take over the Southland Church, and so that's why we never returned. And then Stetson and Mary took over. But we kept investing in the nation, planting churches. We planted a church in the north and the south, and then they populated the whole nation. Today we have a conference there. And so it's a great, incredible work. And then we, of course, returned in 2003. We returned to South London, and we took over another church. Because Pastor Stevens had left it in the hands of Pastor Carnegie, and then he passed it over to us. And I've been there the last 14 years, and spent the last year evangelizing. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Lots of stories in between, but yeah, in a nutshell.
I'm sure we'll hear some of those this week. So let's open it up for questions. If you guys have any questions for Pastor Ajala, go ahead and lift your hand and he'll call on you and field your questions. So anybody at all, anything on discipleship, ministry, what he's done, marriage, family, kids, practical things, so somebody start us off.
Yeah.
You said when you went to Namibia that you were outreaching like you always did. Was there ever a time when you had to modify how you outreach, or when you realized something didn't work and you had to change something?
Well, I would fast forward now and say yes now, but then I would say no. Because I'd only been pastor for years. You know what I'm saying? And so I only did what we were taught to do. I remember our very first street preaching outreach. Pastor Stevens, he took us down to East Street Market. And he said, all right, gentlemen, he said, today we're going to street preach, and Peter, you're first. I'm like, whoa, Pastor. I don't, what do you mean street? But I didn't ask. I just thought, well, okay, I just have to open my mouth and just start, And so we just took what we learned in the early days. Everything that Pastor Stevens taught us as far as outreaching is what we did. We would witness, we would door knock, we would street preach. So that's what we did. But when I went to Namibia, I noticed that they would just go into malls and try and pass out flyers and not really witness. And so I said, we're gonna take the battle to the gates. We gotta go downtown. We went to the clock tower. We set up right there in the center. Even when it would rain, we would start preaching. We got crowds of people that would surround us. I mean, every week you would get, at least every service, you'd get something like 20-something people would come in and get saved. Like every service. It was from our outreaches. And so that's what I would say is we just did what we needed to do then. But now, fast forwarding 14 years, 20 years into the ministry, we have modified things. I've looked at, the thing is you have to be relevant. relevance is so important. And so it means that you're speaking the language that the people that you're trying to reach are speaking. You're looking for things that can connect. Right? We had, when I was pastoring in London, the year 2008 was the year that our church grew by 100 people. What had happened was that there were a lot of street killings, like teenagers going into other teenagers' homes and killing them in their beds. And so we had a lot of knife crime and gun crime. And so we did a play called Street Life, and it drew hundreds of people out. And I remember giving an altar call, 140 people prayed for salvation. Sunday night, I kind of changed the service for one Sunday night. We didn't have enough follow-up workers. The same problem we had in Namibia. All those converts came in, and the converts were larger than the congregation itself. So it was hard to, outreach and to follow up on that. So what I did was I changed our Sunday night service. I sent letters, 140 letters out to all of these converts, invited them to a Sunday night, like a variety night. We had testimonies. We had tables set with snacks. We'd sit around the table with these converts and just talk with them. And we did that one Sunday night, and we locked 100 of them in the church. That was when we grew by. So we were just being relevant rather. And so I think we have to adjust from time to time, but within the pattern, within the mold, we don't break out of that.
Yeah, there's a creativity to evangelism, to follow up.
Yeah.
It's not just one thing.
Yeah.
Every pastor, when you go into your city, you got to try to lock on to something that, as Peter said, is relevant, that will connect with people. And it begins with street preaching and all the things you learn, but then you find your way in other avenues of evangelism that can bear a lot of fruit. Somebody else, that was a great question.
You send out some guys into the field. What are 5 real important qualities you look for?
Okay, one is I want to see a level of fruitfulness in their own lives. Sometimes you have a really good guy, but he's not fruitful. And I think one of the important things is to know that this guy can produce fruit. If you can't produce fruit in the home church, how do you know that you'll really be able to produce fruit? I mean, every church plant is a risk, but you're taking more of a risk when you plant someone who's never been fruitful. 2, I want to know that they have a good marriage. Their marriage is intact. Their wife isn't crazy. 3, I want to know that they're a people's person. Preaching is not really a major issue for me, sending a guy out who can preach. You can learn to preach. Anyone can learn to preach.
Yeah.
Right? Preaching, you're not born as a preacher. You're made as a preacher. Your children, if you got any children, I want to know that your kids are in order. I want to know that you have control. Your kids are under control. You know how to discipline your children and work with your kids. Because that's your first church. Your family is your first church. Yeah. So if you can't tend to your own family well, how are you going to tend to the house of God? This is what Timothy says. And so, and I want to know that he's good with money, how he handles money, how he is with his children, his marriage, how he is as far as his ability to bear fruit within the church. And those are some of the things I look. Numbers of other things I look for, but if you ask for a handful, those would be the things I look at just offhand.
Amen. Very good. Somebody else? Question?
You said you were prideful, but I'm already prideful. How can you fix that?
Okay, so number one is Jesus was a very humble man. He was our Savior. He was God. And he came down to the world, and he took on the form of sinful humanity. He did the most humbling thing that man could do. I mean, God did that for us. And so who are we? So in light of everything, who are we really? And what we have to do is we have to put ourselves in our rightful place. The Bible says God made us from the dust of the ground. And I think to get rid of pride is one, you have to acknowledge it and be willing to tackle it. The Bible says clothe yourself, be clothed with humility. It's something you have to do. It's not something you feel, it's something you do. If you're waiting for this humble feeling, I don't even know if is there such a thing as a humble feeling? I don't really know. People who are prideful about their humility. I'm so humble. Well, how do you know you're humble? So I would say you have to clothe yourself. Right? Moments where your pride is about to manifest, you have to take dominion over that. Say, I'm not going to, you don't have to win every argument. Right? You shouldn't go around thinking you're better than others. The moment you have that thought, you have to reject it. You understand what I'm saying? When prideful thoughts come, you cast them down. Like lustful thoughts, when they come, you cast them down. Thoughts of anger, thoughts of unforgiveness, you have to cast these things down. And that's one of the things that I did. Anytime that something would rise up, if jealousy would rise up, if envy would rise up in my heart, you know, I would immediately rebuke it and attack it and assault it. You know, no one knows, but I know. God knows. And I will address those things in my heart. And every time you attack it and you resist it and you reject it, you get stronger and eventually you overcome it. But yeah, you just have to be aware of those moments and seasons where sometimes it's seasonal. You go somewhere where pride manifests, or you're in a position where pride manifests. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And this is why you should never, ever build your life on your role. The role that you're given in life, never build yourself on that. Always build your life based on the person God's making you to be. Because if your role changes, and believe me, gentlemen, your role will change in life. If you've been building on your role, you're going to lose your sense of self-worth, and you're going to be full of pride. You know, for example, pastor asks you, hey, I've got a church of 300 people. We got a church bus. We've got 100 grand in the bank. We've got 100 couples ready to go out. Who would like to take the church? Everybody would be willing to take a church like that. And after you pastor that church for 3 years, the same pastor comes back and says, hey, we've got a struggling church here. We need a good couple to come in. They've only got 17 people. You're going to have to get a job, you know, and work with these broken people. If you're a man of pride, you'd be like, what? I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, you know, can't you see where I'm at? Yeah. And this is why a lot of people can't believe, they can't understand why I would leave a position of leadership and become an evangelist. A lot of my peers don't understand. It's like you reached your leader. You know, you preach at conferences, you do this, you do that. But it's not about that. It's not about position. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's about serving God in his kingdom and doing his will. I'm at his disposal.
Yeah.
Right? To do his will. Leadership comes and goes. I can leave one role and go into another. And it's all about taking who God's made you to be into the next role that God has for your life. So you could be a manager of a company today, but have to sweep the street tomorrow. And you should do that with the same devotion and dedication and commitment as you did a leadership role. Right? So it's a state of mind. You have to take dominion. I refuse to be prideful on this matter. I refuse to be prideful with my speech, my attitude, my conduct. You don't want other people to perceive you as being arrogant and pig-headed. You have to take dominion over that in your own life. Anyone else?
Yeah. I was going to ask you, when you street preach, did you ever get to a point where you planned, like, you know, kind of planned what you were going to say, or did you just always go out there and just street preach?
I would say the vast majority of times it was spontaneity. You know, I'll tell you, one of the things that I used to do is every Tuesday night I would go to a place called Elephant and Castle. That's where you have the Metropolitan Tabernacle, you know, Spurgeon's Tabernacle. And so I would stand at the bus stop and just preach. And I did that week in, week out. Apart from our Saturday outreaches, I had my own personal outreach. A couple of guys caught into what I was doing, and they wanted to join with me. And we never came prepared. So I would just go out there and I'd see the people. Sometimes the Pastor Stevens might have shared some of the stories. We'll get into, we'll go into the underground, and we'll wait for the elevator to shut with like 20 or 30 people in it, and then just start preaching in the elevator. You know, I got on trains and I preach on trains. I'll stand up in a bus and preach on the bus. Sometimes you get thrown off the bus, but nevertheless, you do it so much, you have a default number of things that you say all the time. You know what I'm saying? But you have to have some kind of structure, I think. You know, you have to have, you might not have prepared per se, but you have a structure in your own mind that you work with. Like every time you get up, you know you're going to say certain things, and those things can mean other things. But yeah, but for vast majority of the time, it's spontaneity.
Pastor, your wife, what role did she play coming up to you being sent out, and how did you, what mistakes did you make, or what, leadership things that you did to lead her, you know what I mean, into the will of God with you?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, now there's several chapters of that. What you just said is so deep, you don't know how deep that is. But let me just go back to the very beginning. My wife has always been, or started off as a very sacrificial person, because she had to, she has a Muslim background, Islamic background, her parents, she's from Cyprus. And so when her parents moved over to England, she had a problem coming to church. Pastor Stevens will tell you, her family came to the church. There were threats that were made. They even threatened that someone would die if they got married. And so they still blame me to this day for several things that went wrong in their family. And so she made that sacrifice where she signed up for a drama class on a Wednesday night so that she could come to church. Her parents thought she was going to drama class to the church. And finally, she couldn't take it anymore, she just told them. And so they gave her an ultimatum, so she had to leave home. She ended up moving in with Trevor Bradshaw and his wife, Denise, at the time. And so she stayed with them until she got her own place. And so she's always been one who's given up everything for the sake of the kingdom. And so when I told her I felt called into the ministry, this is while we were dating, she already knew that Peter wanted to preach the gospel. And so, she didn't have a problem with that. So our first phase of going to Bristol, there was no resistance. As long as you keep your wife happy, then you'll be happy and married. I took 1 day a week for my wife. It would be Thursday, I remember Thursday. Actually, it still is Thursday now. We've had to change and adjust that over the years, but every Thursday is wife day. So this is when I take her out, spend time with her, get coffee, I minister to her, that sort of stuff, right? And I have to keep her happy so that she has no problems with the ministry. The moment the ministry becomes a competition, when it's like your wife is having to compete between you and the ministry, it's like, well, my husband versus the ministry, she gets bitter at the ministry. And so it's your role and your duty, your responsibility rather, to make sure that you think that in your wife and her needs so that she doesn't trouble what God has for you. And again, this has various versions through the years, 20 years of ministry. I've a lot of issues, trying to move around the world and different things like that, many challenges, but nothing that God can't overcome. But yeah, my wife has played a significant role, and she's always been willing. Sometimes you have to find other ways, but yeah, my wife has always come along in the end.
Was it difficult to disciple men when you were in Bristol, you said?
In Bristol?
In Bristol, was it difficult to
sure.
disciple men in the beginning, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, I tell you, one of the things that really helped me in Bristol that kind of relieved the pressure of discipling men was that I got the first couple of guys saved, they were helping me to disciple men. And I think that's one of the greatest frustrations of any pastor, where the pastor's trying to get to every man. It's just impossible. So you need men, you need to pour your life into men who can pour their lives into other men. Like they say, if you learn something, you change your life. If you teach somebody else something, you change their lives. But if you teach them to teach others, you can change the whole world. So it's like a domino effect. And so the point is not, Jesus really poured his life into 12 men. And those men poured it into the multitudes. And so Jesus said, when they said, oh, people are hungry, he said, you give them to eat. I've taught you already, just you give them to eat. You give them something to eat. And so that's the greatest challenge for the pastor is to make men who make men. And so now if I look back, fast forwarding into the last church that I pastored, I had a lot of challenges in discipleship. We experienced what I would call it a generation gap, where you had discipled men who did not disciple the next generation. And then you have new people coming in now, and there's this huge gap, there's this void where discipleship isn't being transferred, or it's not being transferred. And getting over that hump is a major challenge. It's like the men who have everything are not passing it on. You're spending the time with these brothers, these couples. You have fellowship with them, but the content of their conversations, what they say in passing, are not things that inspire or disciple men. And what happens is you 2-3 years or so pass by, and you realize you have a whole chunk of people in church who haven't got a clue.
Yeah.
And so that's what I started to experience the last few years, being there in South London brother I, is that generation gap, and you don't discover it until it's too late. I mean, at least for me, I didn't discover it until, gosh, man, there's a gap. We got good men on this side, we have new converts on this side, but we have no disciples in the middle. So.
That's remarkable. So what did you do to change that? Okay, because you invested, you know what you want.
What I did was I fled. No. So here's the thing is obviously I'm an evangelist now. I'm just telling you what's happened over the last 3 years. I never really fixed the problem. If the truth be told, I'd be honest, the problem is still there. Right? So there's the generation gap is still there. Obviously now I'm thinking about it in hindsight,
What would, okay.
yeah, what I would do is I would have to try and reach those men again. I'd have to start my discipleship programs all over again with those men, and I have to be more focused on these new people that are coming in, and be focused on the connection between the existing disciples and the new fresh souls that God's put into the church. That connection has to remain. Somehow there's been a disconnect from what's coming from the pulpit and my life as a pastor into the main congregation. And then from them into the newer people that are coming in, there's a disconnect. I have to come in and make sure that there's that connection. I got to reconnect again. So I got to reconnect with them. I got to put people on them, and I have to disciple my disciples. You know what I'm saying? I said, you gotta look, there are new people coming in now. You gotta open your eyes. You gotta take care of them. You gotta minister to them. You've got to pour your life into them. And so that's what I started doing in the last year. Leaving, of course, I'm no longer there. And so the new pastor has the task of completing that. But yeah, I realized that I can't allow that disconnect to happen. Like if God were ever to put me in a place of pastoral ministry ever again, I would never allow that to happen again. I got to stay connected. I mean, you can't decide with everyone personally. You know what I'm saying? But I will stay connected to the best of my ability and make sure that my existing disciples become extensions. They have to be an extension. Otherwise, the same thing's going to repeat itself. Okay. Anyone else? Done?
All right, anybody else, if you have a question, go ahead. Anybody? One more? Anybody else want to ask a question?
Yeah. So far as your own children, when they grew up and young teenagers, that type of thing, I don't know if they were tempted to rebel and that type of thing, but how would you deal with that type of situation?
Okay. First, let me just say that I don't subscribe to this whole idea that your children need to backslide first and then come back. I actually don't believe that at all. I believe that your children can live for God from the very beginning to the end. That's my conviction. I mean, yours might be different, but that's what I believe. And so my wife and I have kept our children really close. They're very, very close to us. And so because of that, they have captured a lot of our values, a lot of our convictions. When you hear them speak, they have discernment from their school life to their working life. You can see that they're real Christians. They've got a real, genuine experience with Jesus. And so my kids have never wrestled with that stuff that I hear all the time because of how close we've kept it. Our devotion together, the things that I impart into my kids. I always look for times where I can pour things into my children, things that were never poured into me growing up from my parents. I realize how important that is to pour that into my kids. I take great joy, and I place major importance on dinner time. They say that kids who have dinner with their parents do better at school. They carry out some kind of poll. And I sit with my kids at the table, my wife, and we have all kinds of subjects and topics, things that we talk about, Bible scriptures, stories, articles in the newspaper, just values in life. We just share our lives with them. And then our kids ask questions. And so, and they're transparent with us. Our kids never hide anything from us. And our kids never lie to us. I know that's hard for some people, but listen, I discipline my kids. I've been, I don't abuse them. I've never abused my children, but I have disciplined them, and they know if they lie, they're in serious trouble. Tell the truth and then just, you know, whatever happens, happens at that point. But the truth, you're always better off telling the truth. So my kids always tell us the truth. And so their transparency has helped our relationship with them. And so if they have ideas, they're never afraid to share them. They'll say, oh, that's crazy, where'd you get that from? Well, and then we can correct it. But I never pass an opportunity to address issues in my children, constantly pouring things into them. Anytime I see, hey, where'd you get, what kind of attitude is that? I address it. And so, and they have no fear of coming to talk to me. My children love me, you know, all my kids. And so I would say that the parents, when raising kids, number one, you need to be human with your children. You know, we're not gods, we're their parents, but we're not infallible, we make mistakes. Parents ought to be willing to apologize to their children when you're wrong. You know, parents say they're sorry. Kids learn, oh wow, mom, dad, they're not infallible, you know, and they learn that. It's okay to make mistakes. I let my kids make mistakes, let them fail. But my wife was like, no, let them, let them learn. I want them to learn. And when they fall flat on their face and realize, oh, Dad, so what did you learn from that? Right, so, and that's what that's my methodology. Numbers of other things, but yes, in general, I try to keep my kids as close as possible. So it's like a discipleship, like I'm discipling my own children. Right? You know, John G. Lake spent his time saving the world, in particular South Africa. When his wife died, she was buried before he even got back home. And his children hated him for the rest of their lives. That was his first family. He lost his first family. And I realized I don't want that to happen to me. So I have time for my kids every week. I have family time. I have wife time. I have to make that investment in my children. I bring them along with me so they enjoy the ministry and they don't feel a competition. Or they're not, oh, church again. Oh, church. When I'm 18, my kids, they're not like that. They talk about revivals. They talk about, my kids are excited that I'm here right now. They wanted to come. Oh, Pastor Stevens, you know, and so that's how my kids are. They love what I love because it's how we raise them. Right?
All right, let's all stand. Amen. Let's have a good, strong prayer meeting if you're going to be able to come to prayer at 9 o'clock and then Sunday school. And I've been a little troubled to see you men here in serious members not in Sunday school. So I'm going to be watching today. I've got a mental picture of this right now. So make sure you're in Sunday school this morning. We're doing the series on the God of guidance. It's very powerful. Truth, you're going to need it. If you're a serious man, you're going to need outside influence to provide you with the guidance that you need, and that comes from God. So don't miss that Sunday school. So let's give God praise, worship Him, and then Josh Quintero's going to